In this episode of Talk ADHD, Andrew and I are discussing the things that we as patients can do to help us help our clinicians. In the previous episodes, we've shared the frustrations of our ADHD clinicians and the challenges when we don't provide them with information on time or respond to emails. So I'm drawing on the kind of information I've learned from all of the wonderful ADHD professionals and coaches that I've worked with and who've supported me, as well as my experience as a professional mentor to others with ADHD, to share the really simple information that can start to help you, both help yourself and help your clinician. That this advice is there for you to try, but we can't tell you whether it will work for you. There are no definite answers. So this is about listening to what we say, taking on board what you think could work for you in your situation and giving it a go. But we both hope that you find something that helps you. Hello again, folks. Welcome back to Talk ADHD. So this is part 2 again. So last episode, Andrew and I spoke about the things that we as patients do, more importantly, don't do so well, that makes it difficult for clinicians to provide us with the safest care, particularly in this early stage of titration, towards the end of titration. And as we alluded to, a lot of it is wrapped up in ADHD. A lot of the things that we're not very good at doing and we don't do very well are really symptomatic of the fact that we have ADHD and we've reached out for support. So, as promised, Andrew and I have gone away giving this some thought, and this is really a chance to share some information, some tips, some strategies that you could try to employ, you could try to consider that may help you when starting this process. Andrew, before we begin, I know you've given it some thought and I have. The one thing that I think rattled around my brain on recording that episode, as much as executive function, was a piece about motivation, a piece about why are we less motivated to do things that we know inherently are to help us, that we still don't do, like the opening emails, like the responding to information, etc. Now, my guess, but I'm going to sort of pass this one to you, is that is, again, it's wrapped up in our ADHD, but that's where we've got this sort of, we're in titration, we haven't got the levels of dopamine and norepinephrine and all the other neurotransmitters balanced with the fadas yet. So is there a likelihood that at that phase, that stuff is going to be difficult anyway? And is it about recognizing that at the start?
Yes, of course it's going to be difficult. It's a complex process. You know, you're asked to fill out a lot of paperwork. You're asked to attend appointments. You're asked to change, and that is difficult for the majority of people, not just people with ADHD. To change out of routine is an uncomfortable thing to do at first. So yes, if you then add in executive dysfunction, it becomes even more challenging. But there are things that you can do around those challenges.
Yes, okay, and that's where this conversation has to go. Now I'm going to preface everything I say with this. These are just my thoughts, having mentored lots and lots of people, supported lots of people. The things I might suggest, I cannot tell you if they will work for you. I don't know everyone that listens to this podcast personally. I've not worked with you. And I think starting with that is really important. Anything we see, information online, you know, we've spoken about the hacks before. They are not personalized strategies. They don't have the depth of understanding of us as individuals and our unique circumstances, work challenges, life challenges. However, broadly speaking, looking at both the motivation and the being asked to do things that we already find difficult, and then this piece really about executive function, I think is really important because, you know, doing things at the right time, in the right order, in the right way, is a challenge for lots of us. So it's about understanding what we can do. And then I think there's a conversation for us to have about, okay, we're early stage titration here. What are the fundamentals that may help us, may help our brains be more ready and more able to process and to respond? What are the basics, I suppose, that we can share that would help? So I think that's probably a good starting point before we go into the tools piece. And the one that I will lead with, and I know You struggle with it, I struggle with it, and I don't think I've ever met an ADHDer that says they haven't struggled with it, is sleep and rest. Your brain having the capacity, because it's not exhausted and overwhelmed, to then do things in the right order. So sleep is an episode all in itself. We're not going to spend a great deal of time on this, but I will start with this headline. At this point in the conversation, when you're just seeking help, it's more likely that you are cumulatively overwhelmed. You are already in a state of fatigue. We're now going to add into that stress, confusion, worry, anxiety, anticipation, and more. So spending a bit of time thinking about getting your sleep hygiene, I suppose as it's referred to, as effective as possible at that point, I think could make a huge difference for a lot of people. Would you agree that that would be a good starting point for most of us, just to be as rested as possible, to be able to think as well as possible? But there's also an element of, where possible, sharing some of the load, as I call it. Now, if you're lucky enough to live with someone, whether that's flat share, house share, you're married, you've got a partner, you've got a boyfriend, you've got a girlfriend, you've got a mom, you've got a dad, whomever, if you're fortunate enough to have another person who perhaps you can share some of the requests with, some of the information of, okay, I'm going to have to feed back this information at this time every week, so that they can be a backup memory for you. Perhaps if they're particularly less fatigued than you, I think is a really, really good idea. And I am aware that perhaps the older we get, the more we think, I shouldn't have to rely on other people, and I don't want to have to ask other people for quote unquote help. But listen, for me, asking someone else to be a second pair of eyes, to check the emails for you, to help jog your memory, there is no shame in that if it helps you do the things you need to do, if it helps you complete the tasks you need to complete. So whoever it is, I think leaning on someone and asking for support is a really smart move, because while some of the other things I've been thinking about and I'm going to share could help, a lot of them rely on us as the individual carrying them out on our own with no support, when dysregulated, when fatigued, when anxious. But connection with someone else, communication with someone close to us to help us remember, can be really, really useful. So it is really important, I think, to just have someone double check the emails, have someone double check, what's come in, to physically come and remind you and say, hey, do you know it's Wednesday? You've got to send that feedback form. And even in terms of the body doubling thing that I mentioned, to sit with you while you do it, right? Have you got to send that feedback? Have you got to do your blood pressure? Okay, John, to sit with you while you do it, great. And then send, right? Rather than leaving you to it. So leaning on someone, I think, is really important, particularly from a point of motivation, because it can help us feel like, I don't want to let this person down if they've been kind enough to give me their time to support me. If they're taking their time to help, it would seem reasonable that I do what they're reminding me to do now, sort of in this instant.
I imagine people are listening to this thinking, well, that would be lovely. And I sit here having slept an hour last night. So, so yeah, it is something that is going to impact on cognitive function. If you've not slept, ADHD or not, you will struggle to concentrate. So with ADHD, that compounds everything and makes processing information more difficult. Just dealing with being tired is a strain in itself. So yes, it's often the basics, isn't it, Matt? That we have to lay down those. We're made of flesh. We're organic creatures, and taking care of that is really important. And sleep is one of the most important aspects of that. Ideally, we're spending a third of our lives asleep. And that is our restorative recovering time. And if we don't have that, then we're not going to be doing as well across the board.
Yeah. I completely agree, and I don't think anyone listening would be able to disagree with that. So look, here's some very fundamentals when we talk about sleep, and you can look at all the information about sleep hygiene out there and what things we should and shouldn't do, coming off screens at certain times, reducing blue light stimulation, having a pre-sleep routine, which in itself is an oxymoron, because one of the things that ADHD makes difficult is having any sense of routine and doing anything regularly. There are, however, I think, things that may help you in terms of the putting thoughts in place. I am a great fan of brain dumps. So not journaling per se. Journaling for me is a different tool. It's a more in-depth tool, but a brain dump when I'm overwhelmed, just to scratch stuff out on paper and not care whether it's spelt right, grammatically correct, but just get the noise out, can be useful for some people. It can help us just feel like there's a bit of space in our brain, whether that's a bit of space to allow us to feel a bit more rested, to get to sleep, or even just to get extraneous thoughts out so we can focus on the important stuff. So we can say, I've got this to do, I've got that to do. But I think why I wanted to start with sleep is to say, yes, you're right, it's challenging, right, for all of us. And the more fatigued we are, the harder it gets. So at this start of the process, when you're working with a clinician, I think there's information to be shared that should have already come up about how do we sleep and what's your sleep like and how affected are you by that. So using other people 100% is always something I recommend. I did just recommend or mention body doubling as a concept. Now, there are lots of body doubling sort of services out there. We've got a group within our WhatsApp community where people sometimes will try and body double. Body doubling with strangers, or rather people not connected to our family, has its limitations. It's limited by the fact that it might not connect completely or connect completely with when you need to do those tasks. It's limited by the fact of, do we do it by phone, by video, by setting out some boundaries? But as a broad stroke, as a broad approach, yes, it is just leaning on someone else again, having someone else to hold us accountable, to be able to say, I've got to do this by this time for this person. And I'm going to start now, and having somebody else say, right, well, at that time, I'll check in and make sure you have. And I will hold you accountable and ask you why not, if you haven't. And again, I think there's an element of, if someone is willing to give you their time to body double with you, motivation wise, it helps. Impetus wise, it helps. So as a clinician and an ADHD, in terms of those couple of things first, Andrew, any thoughts, anything you want to add?
I went off on 1,000 tangents there. I've only had 1 hour's sleep. But I come back to your starting point. Because you went off on 1,000 tangents as well, which is awesome. Your starting point was about getting a good night's sleep. And I've been a mental health nurse for 30 years, and I was firmly convinced in my early career that the way to get a good night's sleep is to sedate at night. And I used to get angry with doctors that wouldn't prescribe sedation at night. If people can't get to sleep, let's help them get to sleep with something that helps them get to sleep. But this end of my career, which isn't the other end, but it's, I'm a lot more experienced than I was. The most important piece of advice that I ever give about sleep is, it's actually the opposite that is true. It's the other end of the night that is the most important. Because we have this rhythm of hormones through our body through the day, sleeping until all hours and sleeping where you can confuses that hormone system. So one of the most important things you can do if your sleep is dysregulated is to get up at the same time, have something to drink, ideally have something to eat, and get outside and get that light in your eyes and tell your brain it's daytime and it's time to get on. That might feel really challenging if you've only slept 1 hour. Hello. But tonight I'm going to sleep, because last night I did not. And today I got up at the usual time and got on with my usual day. So I'm telling my hormone system, come on, we've got to do this, rather than saying, actually, Matt, I can't record the podcast today. I need to get some sleep, and then not sleeping tonight as well. So in terms of that foundational idea of sleep, that is, something that you can do without medications. And yes, sometimes medications are necessary in the short term to get some sleep. I can't think of a single solitary medication that long term helps with sleep. That's not the way to deal with it. So look at all substance, for that matter. It's a short-term fix when things are really, really bad. And I've seen people very chronically sleep deprived who need some medication to help them sleep. That's a very different matter, and is a more medical issue. But this sort of idea of being tired, often it can be about just telling your body that it's organic and it has a routine, and sticking with that. Even if it's just getting out of bed, having that cup of tea having a look out the window, or going for a walk if you can, and then sitting on the couch and not going back to sleep, but just relaxing. Just that
Yeah.
changing location and moving around is an important part of telling your brain that it's daytime, and that gets things moving. Another thing that came up whilst you were talking was a psychological model that's applied in smoking cessation, and it's interesting, isn't it, that smoking cessation is so closely aligned to ADHD that sometimes medicines that are licensed to help with smoking cessation are used off license to treat ADHD. That's how closely aligned these two things are. But the psychology is that we don't start from a point of I want to stop smoking. We start from a point of maybe I should stop smoking. And I think a lot of people come to assessment and looking for treatment at it's called pre-contemplative phase. I've heard that this can sort everything out, and it's not fully thought through. The idea of that commitment, and as much as smoking cessation can be difficult and it takes a few attempts, I think establishing ADHD treatment can be a bit like that, because those foundations aren't there. So lots of the smoking cessation groups that your GP would refer you to are looking at how do we move from that pre-contemplative phase to contemplative, and then actually moving into an active phase of smoking cessation. So laying those foundations, setting those expectations is a really important piece of work to do that is often overlooked at the beginning of the journey. Setting the context. What are we doing here? What are we expecting to see? And how are we going to achieve that? What's going to be the payback? Nobody likes to fill out forms. Well, some people might, but they need a different kind of help. It's not a naturally human thing to do, to sit down and fill out a form and share information. It feels unnatural, I think, to be doing that. What should I be looking for? What should I be saying? And you can get stuck in thinking about that, particularly when your ADHD is not effectively treated, which it's not in this phase of what we're talking about. So being open about that and honest about that with yourself as well, and understanding that, yes, this is going to be difficult, but what's the commitment and what's the payback going to be? Is it worth it? Because if you don't feel like it's worth it, and it's a hassle to do what needs to be done to get the result, then you're not going to put the effort in to do that, irrespective of distractibility and difficulty following instructions and all of those executive dysfunctions. Just the idea of simple rewards. If it's not worth the investment, why do it? So I think often people sort of hit this, whoa, this is more than I expected it to be. Well, yeah, it is. It inevitably is. My titration was more than I expected it to be. I knew I wanted change, but I didn't quite understand what that was going to be like. And I struggled with the assessment process, the titration process, because I too am human, and I too forget appointments, and I too forget to send information when I've promised to send it. So your point about accountability was really important. I mean, sort of going back to last week's episode and what we were talking about last week, a lot of what drives us as clinicians is that accountability. I'm professionally accountable for making sure that information is shared. If it's not and something goes wrong, that's on me. And owning your own accountability, taking responsibility for your part in this shared journey to an optimal treatment is really important. And I think often you can find the motivation in there if you remember what you're aiming for, that optimal treatment of ADHD you've not experienced before if you're new to titration. You don't know what it is. All you've got to go on is what you see on social media, what you see on the news, and it's not the full story, because everybody's ADHD is different and everybody's journey to optimal treatment is different. Things can go wrong and it can be off-putting. And when things go wrong and you've put all that effort in, well, what's the point? Why am I putting all this effort in? I'm not seeing the results that I was expecting. But that's where the conversation with the clinician comes in. And I think I was talking with Sarah about the last week's episode and the guilt that can come with not sending the information, not meeting the expectations and the promise. people can say, oh yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot, but actually there is an emotional response to that usually, and we're good as ADHDers at just sort of minimizing our symptoms, aren't we, and the impact of our symptoms, because that's how we learn to get by. But it comes with a lot of guilt. But a clinician understands, or should understand, that these are symptoms of ADHD. If you're open about that, and you've got someone supporting you that you can be open with about that, it would be wrong of the clinician to be critical of that. If you're sharing, yeah, I'm really struggling to get that information to you, because then we can work on, okay, how do we put that accountability in place? How do we build that motivation? What additional supports need to be in place? And then it's a shared process. Yeah. So yes, there are practical things you can do, but there are also things that you need to be aware of that come from your history about, I suppose they're compensatory strategies, aren't they? But they're sort of unhealthy ones, that sort of hiding the guilt and hiding the, I shouldn't have done that, and I'm just going to pretend like it was, I was shopping and I got distracted. But actually being honest about the feeling that comes with that, because those feelings are impacting on your motivation. They're impacting on your engagement with the process, and a good clinician needs to understand that that's happening, because that affects the decisions that are made about the next steps. If your guide is running on ahead all the time and you're left chasing behind, I can't keep up, you're going to have a very different experience than if your guide walks alongside you. But your guide can't know if you're falling behind unless they turn around or you shout ahead and say, hang on a minute, this isn't working for me. So yeah, you made me think quite a lot there, Matt, actually.
I did. Well, that's good. That's what this is about.
Yeah.
And similarly, just listening to you, here's where my head was going. See, I could now, folks, share with you a plethora of tools, of apps, of websites, all claiming and essentially designed to help you be more organized, to not forget things, to help you with these executive dysfunctions. I could do that, and there's some value in that. However, I think what Andrew has just said is really important. It's remembering that what we're talking about here, particularly, is a piece of our own journey to ADHD understanding where we're still learning. We don't know what we don't know. We know we want change, but we don't really know what change is. And our only reference for change might be what other people have told us. And again, what we've seen on social media, and the fact that we've lived our lives telling ourselves that we're not good at things. I forget emails. I don't remember appointments. I miss things. Not everyone, but lots of us. So what's occurred to me in listening to the way you've just described it, Andrew, I think is this. One of the most useful tools, I think, as we enter into titration is for us to gather as much information about what that means, what the process is going to look like, and to answer the why for things as possible. Because if we answer the why am I going to be asked for this information every week? Why do you need these readings? Why do I need to stay in contact with you so often? Right? And also, why is this clinician I'm working with doing it so differently to my friend Dave's clinician, who said that he got a diagnosis and only speaks to them twice a year, for example? Understanding why gives us the context to be able to commit, to be able to say, okay, I now have reasons. I have reasons why Andrew at Divergence is asking me for weekly feedback on this time, and it's repetitive information. And I understand why you need it every week, because my feedback at the start of the month will be different to the end of the month, potentially, right? The why, I think, is crucial, and it's okay. And we've got to remember that it's okay to ask that. It's okay when we're new to say, can you help me understand this? Because I don't really know what to expect. I thought you were just going to be giving me some pills. I'd go away and I'd see if they work. Having an explanation of, no, that's not quite, is really useful. Once we've got that, though, for me, one of the most important things is, hard as it is for ADHDers, to try and make that new requirement a part of your daily, weekly schedules. Now, whilst routines are difficult for us all, and whilst if we look online, we'll see people that say, oh, I didn't shower and I didn't get out of bed and I haven't, all of those extremes, most of us are managing in some way to function on a daily basis, to get up, to go to work, to go to college, to go to school. And it's about reminding ourselves that we just need to find a way of slotting in these new extras into our existing routines that we manage to do without so much challenge. Okay? And that can be as simple for me as saying every day I log my computer off at 5:30. But before I leave my office, I'm going to have a reminder, whatever that looks like, that says feedback for my clinician. And I'm going to do that before I log off. Now, that could be an alert that pops up on my Google Calendar. It could be an alert on my phone. It could be a Post-it note that's permanently in front of me. Your tool for what that looks like is unique to you. You know what will work. You might need multiple reminders in multiple different formats. But the point is trying to slot it in so it doesn't feel jarring, so it doesn't feel like it's taking up a great deal more time for you to do that, will make it easier to accomplish. And it's about being a bit honest with yourself. It's about saying, what's the alternative here? Because if I know that if I don't do this, if I don't attend the appointments, if I don't give the feedback, there is a risk that because that puts my clinician in a position where they can't provide me with safe care and they can't display that in terms of safety checks, I may be discharged. There may be no alternative. Given most of us are asking for a question to be answered and a solution to be found, it's reminding ourselves that is it worth that extra 5 minutes that it might take to give that feedback? And again, slotting it in. And I can imagine the amount of people listening to this, looking at it, screaming it, going, well, if it were that easy. Yes, I know, I understand. But I believe if I look at the work that was sort of originally posited by Ned Hallowell, and I think William Dodson, about task positive networks and demand mode networks and task switching and why we find that difficult, and the research of Russell Barkley as well, this comes to a fundamental principle. We are not very good with ADHD at directing our attention, switching tasks, and particularly doing things that we feel our nervous systems are less motivated to do. So we have to work a bit harder to build those structures to understand what that looks like. And rather than seeing giving feedback as a new task, trying to see it as an extension of the one that we're currently doing. It's part of my workday on a Wednesday. It's the thing I do before I turn my computer off on a Wednesday, rather than, right, I finished work. God, I've now got to give that feedback. I think there's more chance that our brains will accept that as just a part of the routine, as something we do. Just from your clinical knowledge and research and understanding, does that make sense to you?
Hi folks, it's Matt. Sorry to butt in, but I'll be really quick. It would really help us if you could take a minute to do a few things to help this podcast reach more people. Wherever you're listening, if you could like it, assuming that you do, if you could subscribe wherever you're choosing to listen to this or watch it, and if you could jump onto the YouTube link and leave a comment about the episode that you've just listened to, Andrew and I would really appreciate it, because that all really helps this podcast reach more people. Now,
You.
Yeah, a couple of points. The first one is you spot on with that aligning a new task to an existing task. If you're going to have a routine, so that's why I always talk about medication with breakfast when I'm prescribing medicine in the morning, because if you've got that established routine of breakfast, it's not a lot more to also take a tablet. But it is more, and this is my second point. A lot of the language you were just using there, Matt, was words like additional, extra. Yeah, I think if we went through the transcript, we'd probably find more words that sort of talk about adding in and increasing the load. To someone who has come to a service and asked for help because they're overwhelmed because they can't keep the load that they've got. What I see time and again is people looking to, what can I add? Which app can I add? Which other responsibility? Because apps take work. Apps only work if you put the information in. So there's lots of people asking, what do I add? Do I add a supplement? Do I add this? Do I add that? How about stop? How about, what can I take away? What room can I create in my life so that I've got some time to put these things in that I'm choosing to do? So if you're feeling overwhelmed and feeling like it's extra, that's probably because you're overwhelmed and it is too much. But you've decided to commit to titration of medication in order to calm all of this down. So is that the thing that you're going to abandon? Or is there something else that can go in order to make room in a limited capacity? Because everyone's got a limited capacity to be able to do stuff. I can't do all the things that I want to do every day. And it's frustrating, isn't it? You know, we have all these brilliant ideas. We can't put them into action. But if we don't make room for the things that we have absolutely committed to, then we are going to get overwhelmed. So if it's feeling like it's too much, it probably is. So what can you take out that makes room for it? I think it's an important way of thinking differently about this.
Yeah, and I completely echo that. It is that concept, isn't it? This feels like we're adding pressure and demand. And we can talk about where the intersection between ADHD and perhaps autism and then even perhaps PDA kind of collides. And then we've got demand avoidance as well. And this was like, I'm being told I have to. I've got to give feedback. It is the reframe of, no, I'm choosing. I chose to reach out. I chose to ask for this support. Therefore, I have to choose to commit to the whole process, whatever that may look like. And seeing it as an agency thing and as a choice thing is less likely to create that demand avoidance, to create that pushback. But you're right, as busy as everyone's lives are, and they are, as much as there is going on, it's that thing of saying, if we were all really brutal with ourselves and sat down and said, okay, is there 3 minutes that if I really look at what I do every day, is there 3 minutes I could spare? That I could not do that and instead do that because that's more important? The answer, I think, for most of us would be yes. Is there 5 minutes? Yes. How many of us talk about the fact that ADHD leads us to spend more than 5 or 10 minutes doom scrolling, right? Because we've picked up a phone. It could be as simple, just for that period, of saying, no, I'm not going to do that. And when I feel the phone going up for no reason, actually, I can say to myself, no, actually, what I've got to do, what I choose to do is, I'll do my blood pressure, I'll take my weight, I'll send that feedback form. Yes. But it has to feel like it's our choice, it's our decision, despite the fact that we're being asked to provide this. I think that it comes back to a word you used way back last year when we recorded, I think, the first episode, this patriarchal feeling of seeing a clinician. Thou shalt. I'm the clinician. I'm you. I tell you, you must do this. And there are those of us, even with ADHD, that go, no, I think not, even though we've asked you to do it. So it's about saying, no, I'm choosing that. And we can take that a step further. How many of us who've been prescribed medications have forgotten to take them, can actually say, crap, I forgot to take my meds. I woke up and I didn't take my meds, right? And then we'll be frustrated about that. And when the clinician says, so how was your week of taking meds? Well, actually, Andrew, I only managed to take it 2 days or 3 days because, right? And it goes back to what you said. A simple framework that we choose to take on board of, make your meds your breakfast pudding, make your top up your tea time pudding, right? Makes it much simpler to remember. Makes it a much simpler thing to go, breakfast pills, as long as we put them next to the breakfast cereal, or next to the kettle, or next to the coffee machine, or somewhere where every day, because we feed ourselves habitually, we'll remember to take those medications habitually. If you're fasting, if you don't eat breakfast, put them by your toothbrush. Put them somewhere where there is no chance of you not going, oh, that's the Elvans or the Concerta, or I've got to take that now, right? And sometimes that's what it takes. Sometimes it takes thinking differently about this.
No, I'll shove them in the medicine cabinet along with the ibuprofen and the paracetamol and the everything else, and then I'll forget and I won't open that cabinet. No, make it easier for you to remember that you're committing to. I've got to take that, right? And then, yes, you can look at apps if you so choose. My oldest son uses an app on his phone where when he gets a prescription, he puts in how many of what. And each time he takes one, he clicks a button and it takes it off and it reminds him when he should reorder. For some people, that's great, but it's still prone to user error. It's still prone to, if I don't pick up my phone when I've taken that pill, is it going to be able to tell me how many I've got left? No. Right? So there's an element of all the apps, all the websites, all of the tech that we could employ is only as good as the person that remembers to use it, that chooses to use it. And for me, when I was sat thinking about that conversation we had last week, I just thought this is about that old acronym, KISS, keep it simple, stupid, right? Or keep it stupidly simple, however you want to frame it. Sometimes we are wont to overcomplicate things. We make starting these new processes so big, so important because they are, that we try to overcomplicate them. And all of a sudden, when I'm at my most fragile, discombobulated, distracted, I'm now going to try and implement 3 new systems that help me. No, you're not. You're not. I mean, you might for a week because it's exciting and it's new, but you will forget. And then you'll get the guilt and the shame because you forgot, right? Let's keep it simple. Is it a note on the fridge? Is it a post-it note? Is it asking someone to say, have you? Right? The simpler we can keep it, particularly during titration, for me, the more chance that we'll carry out those things, the more chance that titration is successful. Once you're on your effective dose and you are a bit more in control of your thought processes and able to start tasks and make decisions and stay focused, sure, you can look at your apps and you can look at your new strategies and you can look at different tools, but titration is not the time. It is not the time for all the shiny, the new, because I don't know about you, and I could see you shaking your head because I think you agree. The chances they work during titration are slim to none. But we look to that because of panic, because of the overwhelm that we're already in, right? So keep it as simple and as direct as you can. When do I need to take these pills? Where do I keep these pills? And how do I remind myself to do that every day? By making sure that I take them and put them back in the same place, right? By doing that, how do I know that I've got to do that feedback? By making this part of my normal routine, not feeling like it, like you said, it's that additional load, right? By being really honest and saying, I don't have to do that, whatever it may be. But it's also, and I don't know whether you'll agree with me, it's about knowing that we will, all of us, at least once or twice, forget something, make a mistake. And then it's about being honest about that and being able to say to the clinician, look, I'm really sorry, but I forgot. And here's why I think I forgot. Because, forgive me if I'm wrong, is that not information for you about the state of somebody during titration and actually potentially whether the meds are doing what they're supposed to do as well?
Yeah. And part of titration is about overcoming those as much. Well, it should be. It should be as much about finding the place for medication in your life and the things that get in the way of that. All of these keep it simple strategies are great, but they will still fail sometimes. You will still look at that pot and go, yeah, I do need to take my tablet, but I'll just see to the cat, or I'll just do this. I need to do the dishes, and before you know it, you've left the house. You've not taken your medication, and hey, that happens, and that is okay. So we can get stuck in these cycles of that a lot of negative self-talk, calling yourself stupid, criticizing yourself for not living up to those high expectations, just the same as that smoker who's gone a week and then buckles because they're in the, back in the days when we could smoke in the pub, friends are all smoking. And then they think, shit, I've blown it.
Yeah.
No, you've had a relapse effectively.
Yeah.
And you can get back to working on it.
Yeah.
Because it isn't all going to be glossy and fine. you don't click your fingers and the whole house is decorated and tidy and everything's sorted. It takes time, it takes work, things go wrong. Kids come in with muddy shoes and just when you finished hoovering. That's the nature of life. It's a work in progress, and if you miss your medication, you've either got the choice of going back home and taking it or accepting that's going to be a medication-free day.
Yeah, I agree.
And being quite pragmatic about that, but learning from why did that happen? What could I do differently?
Yes.
The post-it note on the fridge, there's some research that says you'll see it for a couple of weeks and then it'll just disappear into the background. And that's neurotypical observation. So, I think, we can put something down and not realize it's there. I've certainly done that. My daughter asked me where her glasses were the other day. They were on her face.
Yeah. Well, listen, this is why when I mentor people, I frequently say, don't just try and come up with one strategy that works. Let's put together a toolbox of 3, 4, 5 strategies that all affect and help the same thing. And from an ADHD perspective, here's why, right? Everyone listening, just think about this for a minute. How often have you done what Andrew's just described? You've put something in place, it's shiny, it's new, it's exciting, it feels great, and then you suddenly realize you've just stopped. You're not doing that anymore because now it's not shiny, it's not new, and suddenly you then think, God, the wheels have fallen off, and now everything's gone backwards. No, it hasn't. But if you have 3, 4, 5 tools that affect the same thing, so if it's a post-it note originally, and then you say, well, if not a post-it note, I've got an alert set up on my calendar, and if not an alert on my calendar, I'm using a smart home device to send me an alert and talk to me, or I've asked my wife or my partner. Right, well, look, there's 4. And it's not about using all 4 at the same time. It's saying, right, I'm going to go with the post-it note. Post-it note seems to work. But on the first day, you go, crap. I mean, I looked at it. I even looked at it and said, take my meds, and then just closed the fridge door and walked off. Now we go, right, tomorrow, smart home device. Remind me at this time and remind me 3 times between 8 o'clock and 8:05. Why? Because it will be new. Your brain seeks novelty. It's literally seeking that new. So let it be new. And at the point that you're annoyed by that voice, going, yeah. Now you go to the Google Calendar. And when that doesn't work, you go to the partner. And then you go back to the post-it note. And believe me, I see this time and time again. It's about taking one tool out of the toolbox and putting all the rest back in and letting them work until they don't. And then picking another one out and putting them back. If we have that system, if we have that logic in place, what we allow ourselves to do is seek novelty, feel like this is new again, and not be challenged and not be catastrophizing when that suddenly isn't novel and isn't there anymore because we've got something else. That ain't rocket science. That isn't complicated. But it does take a bit of awareness of ourselves that actually I am a bit of a novelty seeker, right? That is how my brain works. And about addressing that it's actually quite a simple thing to do. And I think the same goes for, and I just want to touch on this before we get to wrap this up. Part of the issues we were talking about last episode was responding to emails. So not even getting to do the feedback, sort of you get an email saying, please send us your feedback, right? Now, this is an interesting one. We've spoken about the perils of a no reply inbox. So those emails asking might come from an inbox address that literally says no reply at. And yet, because we're at warp speed, because we're not really paying attention, we click reply, we attach what we think is our updates, and we think we've clicked send. And we have no space to recognize that that's gone nowhere. And then when you get an email that says, you haven't sent us your information for X weeks, we get rattled and we get annoyed. Well, I have. I replied every time. But did you read the inbox? Did you read the address that you were replying to? Right now, I've looked at this quite a lot and I've tried to sort of look at it from all angles. Fine. There's a couple of things I think from an us point of view we can do. Number one is this. We need to ask that question at the start. So when you want to send my reviews, my updates, what address do I use? That's the one you put in your inbox. That's the one you put in your emails, right? We need to say, where will it come from? It will come from no reply.
What does that mean? You might think, what a daft question, but it's a simple question. What does it mean? It means don't reply to it, please. It ain't going anywhere, right? From the email sent point of view, yes, and I've looked at this for myself. Could I, on those emails that come from no reply, have literally the first line, even though the address is no reply, say, do not reply to, right? To reply, to send us your information, click here. Could I do that? Yes. Could I have that in the email footer, the signature? Yes. It still, though, relies on the person receiving it having the ability to pay attention in the right way at the right time to receive that information. Now, it's not about apportioning fault or blame in this, but it is an important thing, isn't it? Why do people miss that? Why do we try to reply? And I've done it, reply to no reply inboxes. Because we just see an email and it's the big reply arrow is the one that jumps out to us, not what's in front. So it's about reminding ourselves, and it's again making that routine, right? So that you've got a draft email that's set up from the start with the right email address, and every week you just open that draft email, enter the new information and send it from there. And the one that you receive is just a reminder. It's just a memory jog. It's just, okay, yeah, but it's in my drafts, right? It's these small systems that we need to be really involved in that will prevent the bigger issues. But what we can't do is go, that's your fault because you sent it from a no reply inbox. That's like driving your car, being pulled over for doing 40 in a 20 and saying to the policeman, that's your fault for not telling me to slow down. The big red round and raise thing was that thing there. That's what that did, right? That, to me, it feels quite similar to that. I can't blame someone else because I put my foot on the gas or because I didn't pay attention to that sign, right?
Yeah, I think it's the same as the having the medication by the kettle and forgetting. It's about owning that and everybody accepting and learning from that. So this is definitely an issue we've been working on in Divergence is how do we respond to that? You know, Divergence, what we're trying to do is understand these challenges and not put barriers to people, but a lot of contact is automated and makes things happen behind the scenes, and it would be nice not to use a no reply and to sit and personally respond to every email at the time that it comes in, but it's just that's not feasible for all the reasons we talked about last week. But owning the fact that, you know, so last week I actually emailed someone to explain how problematic it was that they kept replying to a no reply email, and I sent it from the no reply address, and all of the content was about, and it was, you know, clear, and
Yeah.
you know what I'm like with my emails, just a couple of lines and then a space so that there's time to digest. It was all about no reply and don't reply. Do you know what the person did? They replied to that email. So there is an element of things will still go wrong, and we can learn from that, and hopefully they can learn from that as well. We can accept that things, even with the best systems and the best routines in the world, will go wrong. That's the nature of a significant functional impairment that is required to meet the criteria for a diagnosis of ADHD. It is what it is. And if we can't own that as a community of people, then we're going to have trouble because we're aiming for something that we can't ever achieve.
So actually, I think that's a pretty good place to summarize and round up on. You've just said something there that really struck me. We have said multiple times that 99.9% of people come for an assessment when things aren't going well, right? When they go, I need help, I need to answer this question, whatever that may be. And yet, we're humans. And when we feel challenged because things have gone wrong that we may have a part in, there is that piece of us in human nature that goes, that's not my fault, that's yours. I don't accept that was me. I don't accept that and you're right. Fundamentally, what we're saying is part of the reason we're asking for help is because our brains are not wired in the same way, and it makes doing those things difficult. But if we can't accept that, and we can't be almost humble enough to say, and that may mean I may make mistakes, and all humans may make mistakes. It's going to be very hard to accept anything that a clinician tells us or advises us. Because if we can't own those things that we're challenged by, how do we own improving them? How do we own developing new skills that go along with the pills? If we're constantly saying, not my fault, Gov, I didn't do that. If you hadn't, I wouldn't. No, there's an element of, look, there's me involved in this situation. So I kind of want to wrap this up, right? What hopefully we've done here is a couple of things. We've addressed that the reason that we struggle with these things is ADHD. It is what's wrapped up in our ADHD. We have been very honest about the fact that this period we're talking about, early titration through to the end of titration, the period where we are least likely to be brilliant at putting in place new anything. It's the place where we are likely to be the most overwhelmed and the most discombobulated and the most anxious because we're desperate to feel like there is change. And we're desperate for those big social media presented moments of, oh, life's amazing now, which, let's be honest, is not reality for most of us, right? Better, but not incredible. What I've tried to do from a point of view of thinking about this, of how I'd mentor people, is at this point, my recommendation is let's not put in lots of new. Let's not try and flood you with lots of apps and tools, and let's do the simple, basic things that don't add to what you've already got, that just sit with what you've already got, right? That don't overwhelm you, that just we can make happen at the same time, because there's more chance of doing that. We've openly said we're all going to make mistakes at some point, and that is human and that is okay. It's about acknowledging that we've made a mistake and not being afraid to say, actually, I made a mistake. I'm sorry, I didn't do that. I didn't notice. I didn't send my feedback. I didn't clock. It was no reply, whatever that may be. Yes. And it's not to say that our clinicians are going to wag their fingers and punish us and go, plonker. Can't you do that? Because that's why we're talking to that particular clinician. But if I could leave everyone with one closing thing that I think is really important in this conversation, and I genuinely do, it's this. Remember that the reason you're in titration is because you've asked for help. And unless we are active in that phase as the person asking for help, unless we can understand everything that's required of us, it's us that can't be helped. Not our clinician. It's us that can't get the change we are looking for, that can't get the improvement we are looking for. And that's really hard to say to you all, because those of you going through this process are struggling for the most part with the things that ADHD makes difficult. Yes, but we've got to own this. We've got to own that this will be a difficult period. It will be challenging, and it will take some awareness that, okay, I have to figure out how to make these things work for this period of time, because the net result, if we get it right, is we get to our optimal dose of medication. We get to learn the skills that can start making a difference. And at some point down the line, 6 months, 12 months, 3 years, 5 years, we can look back and go, yeah, you know what? That was tricky, but I'm so glad I invested in it, because look where life is now. Look what's improved. So this isn't a podcast about blame, is it?
No, it's not. It's about refocusing things. And as a clinician, I'd like to say, if you come to me asking for change, what do you expect?
Yeah.
It's going to be a change.
Yeah, it's and a lot of change. Folks, listen, I say it every week, please comment if you would like to. Please share this with other people, because we're trying to share information that I've never seen on other podcasts, but we both have a great passion for this information being helpful. So share it, comment, let us know what you think, and we will see you next week at 11 o'clock for another episode of Talk ADHD. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.